I used to love the way colors danced in the sunlight, how the world shimmered after the rain, and how my paintings captured the essence of everything I saw. Art was my life, my passion, my escape. But that world faded, swallowed by an unforgiving darkness. Losing my sight wasn't sudden. It crept up on me like a slow-moving storm. At first, it was just blurry vision, a difficulty reading small print. Then it became halos of light, distorted figures. And then, one day it was nothing at all. James, my husband, became my lifeline. He was my eyes, my guide, my protector, or so I thought. At first, I was grateful. He took care of everything, my medications, my finances, my daily routines. He spoke to my doctors, made decisions on my behalf, and promised he would never leave me. "I will always take care of you, Claire," he would whisper at night, his voice full of conviction. I believed him. What choice did I have? But the thing about darkness is that it doesn't just rob you of sight. It heightens everything else. You start noticing the things people think they can hide. It started with the little things. A missed doctor's appointment here, a canceled consultation there. Whenever I asked James about them, his answers were vague. "The doctor said there's nothing new to try right now." "The treatments are too risky, Claire. I don't want you to get your hopes up." I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust him. But doubt began to creep in like a shadow under a locked door. Then there were the eye drops. James was adamant about administering them himself, always reminding me how important they were to maintain what was left of my eyesight. Yet, after weeks of using them, I wasn't maintaining anything. My vision wasn't stabilizing, it was worsening. "James, I don't think these drops are working," I admitted one night, gripping his arm. "Maybe we should try something else." He sighed, his tone filled with exasperation. "Claire, you're not a doctor. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." I nodded, swallowing my unease. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but the world around me felt smaller. James was the only person I interacted with regularly. He discouraged my friends from visiting, saying it would just stress me out. He handled all my phone calls, my messages, my finances. He made sure I never left the house without him. I told myself he was just being protective. I told myself he loved me. But love shouldn't feel like a prison. One afternoon, James took me to a new doctor. I remember sitting in the sterile examination room, my hands gripping the arms of the chair as the doctor spoke in hushed tones to James. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear the shift in his voice. Hesitation, something uncertain. "There have been promising advancements," the doctor said. "It's not a cure, but there's an experimental procedure." "We're not interested," James cut in, his tone sharp, final. I felt his hand tighten around mine. "It's too risky, and Claire has accepted her condition." I turned my head in his direction, confusion twisting inside me. "What advancements?" I asked. James squeezed my hand again. "Too hard this time." "Nothing important, honey. Let's go." He led me out of the office before I could ask anything else. That was the moment the doubt truly took root. Doubt turned into something more sinister the night I overheard him on the phone. James had gone into his office, but he hadn't closed the door all the way. I was lying in bed, still awake, when I heard his voice. Low, urgent, cautious. "She's completely dependent on me now." My breath caught in my throat. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. As long as she keeps using the drops, there's no chance of improvement." My body turned ice cold. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening to the one person I had trusted above all else confirming my worst fears. He had been lying to me. He had been making me worse. For what? To keep me weak? To keep me under his control? I had no answers, only a sinking realization that I was more trapped than I had ever been before. I turned onto my side, silent tears streaming down my face. James came to bed a few minutes later, brushing his hand over my hair like he always did. "I love you, Claire," he murmured. I stayed quiet, pretending to be asleep, because for the first time in my life, I was terrified of the man lying next to me. James had a habit of keeping everything in its place. He liked control, order, routine. But for once, his obsession with tidiness became his mistake. That day, he had rushed out, late for a meeting, leaving the bathroom cabinet slightly ajar. It was a small detail, something most people wouldn't notice. But my world was built on details. the sounds, the patterns, the small things that replaced what I could no longer see. Curious, I reached inside, my fingers grazing over the familiar bottles and pill containers. But then, I felt something new. A small rectangular box, slightly rougher than the others. I pulled it out, my fingers tracing the embossed letters on the label. James had always administered my eye drops himself. He insisted on it, saying he wanted to be sure I was taking the right dosage. But as I ran my fingers over the prescription bottle, something gnawed at me. I needed to know. Heart pounding, I made my way to the living room, where I kept my old tablet. With voice commands, I activated the accessibility reader and scanned the label. The robotic voice read out the name of the medication. My stomach twisted. It wasn't the medication I had been prescribed months ago. I commanded the tablet to search for information about the drug, holding my breath as the results loaded. The moment the voice began reading out the details, my blood ran cold. These drops weren't designed to treat my condition. In fact, long-term use could worsen eyesight. The world felt like it was tilting. James had been making me worse on purpose. When James came home that evening, I was sitting in the dimly lit living room, gripping the small prescription bottle like a lifeline. My pulse was steady, but my thoughts raced like wildfire. "Claire, why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, his voice carrying that same gentle concern he always used. It made my skin crawl. "I found the eye drops," I said flatly. There was a pause, just for a second. But it was enough. "I don't know what you mean," James said too casually, stepping closer. "The ones you've been giving me. They're not my prescribed medication, James. They've been making my condition worse." A thick silence settled between us. Then, James sighed, his voice laced with forced patience. "Claire, you're misunderstanding the situation. Those drops were meant to stabilize your condition." "That's a lie," I shot back. "You've been sabotaging my recovery." "Why, James? Why would you do this to me?" He exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. "Claire, you're exhausted. You've been struggling, and I've only ever wanted to help you. You're being paranoid." I felt my nails dig into my palms. "Stop gaslighting me, James," I said, my voice shaking. "I trusted you." James knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Claire, think about it. If I really wanted to harm you, why would I be here taking care of you? Why would I spend every day making sure you're safe?" I yanked my hands away. "Because you don't want me to get better. You want me to be helpless, dependent. You want control." I heard him sigh again, this time more irritated. "You're emotional. You're not thinking straight. I love you, Claire. I've given up so much for you." The worst part, a tiny broken part of me wanted to believe him. I had loved this man. I had trusted him with my life. But now I was finally seeing him clearly. I knew I wouldn't get the truth from him. So I dropped it. I swallowed my anger, my fear, and let my voice soften. "You're right," I said. "Maybe I am overreacting. I just want to trust you." James exhaled, relieved. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "That's my girl. You don't have to worry about anything." I forced a smile. But in that moment, I made a decision. I was going to take my life back. I couldn't do it alone. That night, when James finally fell asleep, I sat in bed, heart racing. I reached for the burner phone I had hidden under my mattress, one I had secretly ordered months ago, just in case. I dialed the only person I knew I could trust. "Claire?" Hearing Emily's voice nearly broke me. Emily had been my best friend for years, but when James and I got married, he slowly pushed her away, saying she was toxic for me, that she didn't understand our relationship. I had believed him. I had let myself be isolated. "Emily," I whispered, "I need your help." I explained everything. James's control, the drops, the lies. There was silence on the other end before Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling with anger. "You're getting out of there, Claire." Together we started researching options. That was when we found it. An experimental surgery, a cutting-edge treatment still in trial phases, but showing promise for partial sight restoration. It was risky. It was expensive. But it was my only chance. "If there's even a chance I can see again," I told Emily, "I have to take it." Over the next few weeks, I played the role of the obedient wife. I nodded when James told me what was best for me. I took the drops when he handed them to me, only to flush them down the sink later. I started setting aside money. I became pretty wealthy after my parents died. They left me a sizable inheritance and some properties, but all of this was being managed by James now. And that's probably why he wants to keep me under his control. I let James think he still had control, but what he didn't know was that I had already booked the surgery. And soon, for the first time in years, I was going to see him for who he really was. The first challenge was getting out. James had built my life into a prison, and I had spent years learning its rules. He kept my schedule tight, my finances controlled, and my independence just out of reach. If I wanted to escape, even for a few days, it had to be flawlessly planned. I needed a reason to leave. Emily invited me to spend the weekend at her place. I told James over dinner, keeping my voice casual. She's been reaching out, and I thought, maybe it's time I reconnected. I could almost hear the frown in his voice. Claire, I don't know if that's a good idea. You get anxious in new places. What if something happens? You'll be safer here. I forced a smile, keeping my hands steady as I cut into my food. I know, but I need to do this. I miss her. There was a pause, long enough for my heart to hammer against my ribs. Then James sighed. If it's what you really want, I won't stop you. His words sounded supportive, but I knew better. He was already planning to check in, to call constantly, to keep me tethered. But it didn't matter. I was getting out. Emily met me outside the clinic. The moment I stepped into her car, she grabbed my hand and squeezed it. This is it, Claire. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The clinic was sleek, modern, and smelled sterile. I listened as the doctor explained everything again, how the surgery worked, the risks, the possibility that it might not succeed. There's no guarantee, Mrs. Lawson, the doctor said gently. Partial restoration is possible, but we can't predict the results. I could feel Emily's gaze on me, waiting to see if I'd back out. But I didn't. I want to do it. My voice was steady. The surgery itself was a blur of anesthesia, beeping machines, and distant voices. At one point, I felt like I was floating, adrift in a sea of darkness that felt more familiar than it should have. And then suddenly, I wasn't. I woke up to a dull, throbbing pain in my skull, the weight of the bandages pressing against my face. My throat was dry, and my limbs felt heavy. Claire! Emily's voice was soft, cautious. I blinked, my right eyelid fluttering against the gauze. Light. A small sliver of brightness seeped through the bandages. Not total darkness. Not blindness. Tears welled in my good eye. I think it worked. Emily let out a choked laugh, squeezing my hand tighter. Oh my God, Claire, you did it. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustments. At first, my vision was blurry, disorienting. I had to relearn how to judge distance, how to navigate with partial sight. The world was no longer just sound and touch. It was color, movement, shadow, and light. And most of all, I could see myself. When Emily held up a mirror, I hesitated before looking. I had avoided mirrors for years, afraid of the reflection I could no longer recognize. But this time, when I turned my head and saw the woman staring back at me, something inside me shifted. I looked exhausted, pale, a little thinner than I remembered. But I was there. You're beautiful, Emily whispered. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I'm going home. Emily's smile faltered. Are you sure? You could stay with me. Not yet, I said. I need to see him for what he really is. And this time, I meant that literally. I stepped into the house with my sunglasses on, my movements careful and deliberate. James greeted me at the door, pulling me into his arms. I missed you, baby. Was the trip okay? His voice was warm, but I caught the subtle undertone of control. It was nice, I murmured. As he pulled away, I tilted my head slightly, watching him through the sliver of my right eye. For the first time in years, I saw him. His smile was forced. His eyes flicked toward my luggage, as if checking to make sure I hadn't brought back anything unexpected. You look tired, he said, brushing my hair back. Did you take your eye drops while you were gone? I nearly flinched. Of course, I lied. He smiled, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. Good girl. The rage that burned in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt before, but I swallowed it down. I'm exhausted, I murmured, feigning weariness. I think I'll rest for a bit. James nodded, rubbing my back gently. I'll bring you some tea. As I made my way to the bedroom, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My right eye, clear and alert, stared back at me. I wasn't powerless anymore. James had no idea that the blind woman he had controlled for years was finally watching him. The first thing I did was pretend nothing had changed. Every morning, I let James place the familiar drops into my useless eyes, smiling faintly as he reassured me they were necessary. But I had already replaced the liquid inside with saline. Every evening, I acted as if I still needed his guiding hand to navigate our home. And in between, when he thought I was resting, I watched. And I learned. It started with small things. The way he never hesitated before leading me away from certain drawers. Like he instinctively knew which ones held things he didn't want me to find. The way he locked his study at night, pocketing the key with a casual ease I had never noticed before. I waited until he left for a business dinner one evening, one that I strongly suspected involved a woman who was not me. Then, with trembling fingers, I searched. I started with his desk, flipping through papers, emails, bank statements. And that was when I found it. A financial record, one that showed the steady bleeding of my inheritance. Thousands drained into failed businesses, luxury vacations I never went on, expensive gifts I never received. He had been living off my money, not for us, for himself. The next few days were filled with quiet observations. For the first time, I saw James for who he really was. I had spent years relying on his voice, trusting his touch, believing his words. But now, I had sight. I saw the way he smirked at his own reflection in the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was untouchable. I saw the way he scrolled through messages on his phone late at night, an amused little smile on his lips. And when I stole his phone while he showered, I read the messages. James, she's so easy to control, still thinks I'm her savior. Unknown number. And she still doesn't know? James, not a clue. I keep telling her treatment is too risky. The longer she's blind, the longer I can keep things just the way I like them. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. This wasn't just about the money. He had wanted me to stay blind, because a blind Claire was a helpless Claire. A blind Claire wouldn't question, wouldn't see the late-night affairs, wouldn't find the bank statements, wouldn't notice the way he lived like a king while she stumbled in the dark. I had spent years believing James was my protector, but James had been my jailer. You were right, I whispered into the phone. Emily's voice was sharp with concern. Claire, what's wrong? Everything, I said hoarsely. You were right about him. He's been lying to me, stealing from me, keeping me blind on purpose. I told her everything. The fake concern, the missing money, the affair. I expected outrage, fury. But when Emily finally spoke, her voice was calm. I never wanted to be right about this, she murmured, but I did want you to see it for yourself. I see everything now, I whispered. There was silence on the other end before she said, then it's time to take your life back. From that moment, I had a plan. James had been careful, but he had grown arrogant. He never expected me to open his locked drawers, to snoop through his hidden files, to listen in on his calls. But I did. I found paperwork proving he had been embezzling money from our joint accounts, shifting it into private investments under his name. I found emails from his lawyer discussing a potential divorce settlement, one where I would be left with nothing thanks to the mental incompetence James had documented from years of being my caretaker. And most importantly, I found the medical records, the ones proving that he had rejected new treatments on my behalf, that he had signed consent forms in my name, declining surgeries that could have saved my vision sooner, that he had been giving me the wrong medication for years. I photographed everything. And then I did something that made my heart race with exhilaration. I called our bank. Hello, this is Claire Lawson. I need to make some adjustments to my financial accounts. Oh, and I'd like to place a fraud alert, please. The woman on the line hesitated. Mrs. Lawson, your husband usually manages your finances. Should we consult? No, I interrupted, voice firm for the first time in years. From now on, I manage my own affairs. It was time for James to learn what it felt like to be helpless. And for the first time, I felt free. The moment I found the listing, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. James was selling my property, not just any property. One of the last few things I owned outright, untouched by his financial games. He had already drained my inheritance, siphoned my accounts, and kept me blind to the truth. But this was the final straw. He thought I was still helpless, that I'd never see the paperwork, that I'd never know. But I did know, and I was done playing the fool. That night I called James. I kept my voice soft, controlled. I let the tremble slip in just enough to sound like the meek, compliant wife he thought I still was. "James," I murmured, "I was thinking, we should have dinner together tonight, just the two of us. It's been so long since we sat down properly." Predictably, he took the bait. "Of course, darling," he said smoothly. "I'll bring your favorite wine." I smiled. Perfect. Let the games begin. The dinner was a perfect illusion. I wore my usual soft, neutral colors, the ones James always said suited me best. I let him pull out my chair, let him pour my drink, let him touch my hand reassuringly as he told me he would always take care of me. "I know you get anxious, Claire," he murmured. "You don't have to worry about anything. Just trust me." I smiled. Then I reached for my wine glass without hesitation. With my right hand, with my good eye locked directly on his. James's expression froze mid-sentence, confusion flickering in his gaze. "Claire..." I tilted my head, savoring the moment. "What's wrong?" His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted from my face to my hands. He swallowed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. I can see you, James." Silence. A long, drawn-out pause where the entire atmosphere shifted. I leaned forward, my voice sharper now. "I can see everything." His grip on the table tightened. That's wonderful," he said, forcing a smile. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I let the silence stretch, let him squirm. Then I pulled a thick folder from my lap and set it on the table between us. "Maybe because I wanted to see what a liar really looks like," I said coolly, flipping open the first page. James paled as he saw the documents. Bank statements, property records, copies of my medical reports, with his forged signatures declining my treatments. His hand trembled as he reached for the papers. "Claire, this isn't what you think." I laughed softly. Laughed. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you drained my accounts. It looks like you stole from me. It looks like you were drugging me, so I'd stay blind and dependent on you." His face twisted. "I was protecting you!" I slammed the folder shut. The sharp crack of paper and leather against the table made him flinch. "Protecting me?" I repeated, voice ice cold. "By isolating me? By making sure I had no friends, no independence, no sight?" James's mask was slipping. I could see it. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands curled into fists against the table. "I gave up everything for you," he hissed. "And this is how you repay me?" I scoffed. "Gave up everything? You lived off my money. You used my name to get ahead. You stole my choices." His face contorted with rage, but I didn't care, because I was done. James ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "All right, Claire, what do you want? You want me to apologize? Fine, I made mistakes. But don't act like you can just walk away from everything we built together." I smiled. A slow, victorious smile. "Oh, but I already have." I pulled another set of papers from my bag and slid them across the table. "These are divorce papers, already filed. I've frozen our accounts. Well, what's left of them anyway. And I've put a fraud alert on everything under my name. You won't see another dime from me." James's face turned red. "You can't just..." "Oh, I can," I interrupted smoothly. And I already did. His hands curled into fists. He was seething. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you're better than me?" I stood up, grabbing my coat. "I don't think I'm better than you, James." I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I know I am." His mouth opened. Maybe to yell, maybe to beg, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and walked away. And this time, I never looked back. The first night in my new home, I stood in the middle of the empty living room, letting the silence settle around me. No James, no deception, no suffocating control. Just me. It felt strange, liberating, but terrifying. For years, I had lived in a world carefully curated by someone else. Now, every decision was mine alone. And I had no idea where to start. So I began with the basics. I filled my home with things that felt like me, soft, warm colors. Instead of the stark whites and grays James had preferred, I hung paintings, some from my past, some new. I placed fresh flowers on the windowsills, their scent filling the space with life. I woke up early and took walks outside, feeling the sun on my face, letting my good eye take in the world I had been blind to for so long. I had spent years trapped in the dark, not just physically, but emotionally. Now every sunrise was a reminder that I was free. For the first time in years, I picked up a paintbrush. The first strokes were hesitant. My vision wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. Painting had always been about feeling as much as seeing. And as I moved the brush across the canvas, I felt something inside me shift, like a door opening after being locked away for too long. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. One afternoon, as I sipped coffee in a quiet cafe, scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon an article about a nonprofit organization that helped individuals with disabilities regain independence. Something about it struck a chord. I had spent so much time feeling powerless, trapped by my blindness and James' manipulation. But what if I could help others find their way out of that darkness too? The next day, I reached out. The organization Vision Forward specialized in empowering people with visual impairments, offering mentorship, career guidance, and therapy. They were looking for volunteers, and without hesitation, I signed up. My first session was nerve-wracking. I sat in a room with a group of people, some fully blind, some partially like me, all of us with different stories but a shared struggle. I listened as they spoke about their fears, the loss of control, the isolation, the exhaustion of always having to prove themselves. I understood every word. When it was my turn, I told my story, not just about my blindness, but about reclaiming my life after James's deception. The room was silent as I spoke, and when I finished, I saw something in their faces that I hadn't expected. Hope. That day, I knew I had found something meaningful. This wasn't just about healing myself anymore, it was about helping others heal too. Emily was the first person I called after moving into my new home. "So, how does it feel?" she asked, her voice warm with excitement. "Like breathing for the first time," I admitted. Emily had been my rock throughout everything. She had helped me uncover James's lies, supported me through the surgery, and never once let me feel alone. Now, I wanted to do the same for her. "Dinner at my place," I told her. No arguments. That night, as we sat on my couch, laughing over a bottle of wine, I realized how much I had missed having real, genuine connections. For so long, my world had been limited to James. He had controlled my life, made me believe that he was all I needed. But sitting there with Emily, I saw how wrong that had been. Friendship was just as vital as love, maybe even more. I started reaching out to other old friends, reconnecting with people I had lost touch with. Some relationships picked up easily, while others took time, but I wasn't in a rush. I had all the time in the world now, and I wasn't wasting a second of it. Adjusting to life with partial vision wasn't easy. There were frustrating moments, days when my depth perception made simple tasks difficult, when I misjudged distances, when I felt like my body was betraying me. But I refused to let it defeat me. I learned to navigate the world with confidence, not fear. I took mobility training classes, mastering techniques to move through busy streets without hesitation. I trained my good eye to compensate for the loss of the other. And with every challenge I overcame, I grew stronger. One evening, as I walked home from a late meeting at Vision Forward, I passed by a shop window and caught my reflection. For a moment, I stopped. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Gone was the fragile, dependent wife who had clung to a man who never truly loved her. In her place stood a woman who had survived, who had fought to reclaim her life. A woman who wasn't afraid anymore. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled. Because I finally saw her. Me. The first sign of James's downfall came sooner than I expected. At first, he tried to keep up appearances. He put on his usual charming act, convincing people he was fine, that I had overreacted, that everything would go back to normal soon. But the cracks were already showing. Without access to my inheritance, his financial stability crumbled. He had funneled so much of my money into risky ventures, assuming he would always have more to fall back on. Now, his investments were failing, creditors were knocking, and the carefully crafted life he had built on deception was slipping through his fingers. It didn't take long for people to see through his lies. With the truth about his manipulations and financial fraud coming to light, his professional reputation suffered. Clients backed out of deals, former business associates distanced themselves, and the once powerful man who thrived on control was now struggling to hold on to anything. And that's when the call started. At first, they were casual, his usual sweet talking, trying to coax me into a conversation. "Claire, I think we should talk. Things got messy, and I just want to clear the air." I ignored them. Then they turned desperate. "I made a mistake. I know that now. You were right and I was wrong. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Still, I didn't respond. And then finally, they turned bitter. "You think you're better than me now, Claire? You wouldn't have lasted a day without me. You'll come crawling back. You'll see." I didn't bother to block his number. I wanted him to know I saw his messages. I wanted him to feel the silence. He had spent years keeping me in the dark. Now I was the one shutting him out. I never sought out news about James, but somehow it always found its way to me. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he had been forced to sell the house I once called home. Without my money to sustain his lifestyle, he was drowning in debt. The business ventures he had used to justify his deception were falling apart one by one. People who had once sung his praises now avoided him. And the women, the ones he had flirted with so shamelessly while I was blind, disappeared the moment his wealth did. One evening, while grabbing coffee near my office, I overheard two former acquaintances talking about him. "Did you hear about James?" one of them said. "It's bad. He's completely broke. I saw him the other day, and he looked awful." "Serves him right," the other muttered. "I don't feel bad for him at all. He had it all, and he threw it away." I sipped my coffee and left before they could see me. For a moment, I felt a sense of satisfaction, vindication even. But it didn't last long, because as much as James had hurt me, as much as I had suffered under his control, I realized something important in that moment. He wasn't my concern anymore. His downfall wasn't my triumph. My real victory wasn't in watching him lose everything. It was in knowing that I had built something better, that I had rebuilt myself. A few weeks later, I received a final message from James. "Claire, please, I don't have anyone else to turn to. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for your forgiveness. Just talk to me, please." I stared at the words on the screen for a long time. Forgiveness? I didn't owe him that. He hadn't asked for forgiveness when he stole years of my life. He hadn't asked for it when he took my sight, my independence, my trust. And yet, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't afraid. I had won, not because he had lost, but because I had walked away and built something greater than anything he had ever imagined for me. So instead of responding, I deleted the message. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. I had already moved on. The city feels both familiar and foreign, like walking through an old photograph with a fresh lens. I stride through the crowded streets of my hometown, the place I once associated with darkness, betrayal, and pain. Today, though, it feels different, vibrant, alive. It feels like mine. It's been years since I left, but in that time, I've created a life I'm proud of. I've reclaimed myself, piece by piece, building a future filled with purpose and joy. I've traveled the world, painted landscapes I once only dreamed of seeing, and dedicated myself to causes that truly matter. Every step I take now is deliberate, confident. My right eye, the one I see the world through, feels like a constant reminder of the battles I fought and the victories I earned. I no longer see partial vision as a limitation. It's a badge of survival. As I pass by a coffee shop, my attention is drawn to a figure sitting alone on the patio. His slouched posture, the defeated look in his eyes, it takes me a moment to register who it is. James. He looks smaller than I remember. His suit is wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his face wears the lines of someone who has spent too long chasing something they could never hold on to. For a fleeting moment, I wonder if he sees me the way I see him. A stranger. because that's what he is now. Someone I used to know, someone who once held power over me, but who means nothing to the woman I've become. As if on cue, James glances up, his eyes meeting mine. Recognition flickers in his expression, followed quickly by something else: shock, maybe even regret. I see his mouth open slightly, as though he's about to speak, but I don't give him the chance. I hold his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then turn and walk away without a word. I don't need to hear his excuses. I don't need his validation. The old Claire might have stopped. She might have listened, hoping for closure or an apology that would never truly mend the wounds he inflicted. But I'm not her anymore. As I continue down the street, the encounter doesn't linger in my mind. Instead, my thoughts are filled with gratitude for the life I've built since leaving him behind. My days are now a canvas, filled with color and meaning. My work with the nonprofit organization has flourished, allowing me to help others who face challenges like mine. Seeing the confidence and independence blossom in people I've mentored fills me with a sense of purpose I never felt before. I've also found joy in the simple things, painting the landscapes that once existed only in my imagination, walking through bustling markets in cities I've explored, and reconnecting with friends who remind me of how much love and support exists in the world. Most of all, I've found peace within myself. For so long, I defined my worth by how others saw me, by how James saw me. Now I see myself clearly, and that clarity is more valuable than anything I lost. I stop at the edge of the park, watching children run across the grass, their laughter ringing through the air. This place used to hold memories of pain, of what James took from me. Now it holds nothing but possibilities. I smile to myself, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you've made it to the other side of something impossible. It's not the vision in my right eye that gives me this clarity, it's the perspective I've gained. James was a chapter in my story, but he wasn't the ending. He wasn't even the turning point. That came when I decided to fight for myself, when I chose to take back control of my life. As I walk away from the park and back into the crowded streets, I know I'll encounter people who still remember me as the woman who lost everything. Let them remember, because what they'll see now isn't someone defined by loss. It's someone who triumphed over it. James didn't break me. In fact, in a strange way, he set me free. My freedom, my independence, my happiness, those are the greatest victories I could ever claim. And as I continue walking, radiant and unshaken, I know one thing for certain. I don't need revenge. I don't need validation. I don't even need to look back. Because for the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be,